Hi guys! Welcome to the first ever episode of my podcast Thriving, where we talk about thriving in your 20s, living alone, adulting, growing up, just, experiencing life. And our first season is focused on the meaning of home and how it impacts our lives as young adults who are still figuring it out. And my first ever guest is my very good friend, Claudia. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Because the first season is about home, what home means in your life, I thought you were going to be an amazing guest with your very interesting life story. And it's so different to my life story. And I think we can just compare our experiences and how we kind of navigated that world. So tell me everything about your life story.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, my life story is a bit complicated. It's all over the place, but I'm half Spanish and half Vietnamese. My dad's Spanish, my mom's Vietnamese. And I was born in Hanoi, Vietnam. And I spent the first 5 or so years of my life there before we started hopping around. Due to my dad's job, we moved to different postings like every 3 years or so, which I loved and had a great time doing. So we started in Vietnam and then we moved to Angola, and that's where I did some of my early elementary school. We moved back to Vietnam, and then we moved to Mauritania, which is in Western Africa near the Sahara. And then I graduated high school in Mali before moving to Madrid during peak pandemic to live on my own. And then I moved here to Toronto, Canada.
Well, my life story is going to be much more shorter. I literally grew up in the origin of my culture. I grew up in Ukraine. I grew up in a capital city. I moved a couple of times, but I just moved from one kind of district of the city to another. And then I moved here to Toronto, Canada, also all by myself at 18. It's crazy looking back right now. Like, it feels like it's been so long, but at the same time, it feels like it's just, happened yesterday. But because you grew up in so many different places, what is the place that you can call home now?
I think it's a little bit different because I would consider like my home to be Hanoi, but also Madrid, and my parents still live abroad. So really wherever we're together kind of feels like home. But I don't know if I have a solid specific one place. Currently though, I would say maybe more Madrid because it's just more accessible to me living in this part of the world. And it's somewhere where like every time I fly back and I like step into my apartment and it smells like my apartment and I step into the air of Madrid, I just kind of breathe it in and I'm like, it's so familiar and like comforting.
I feel like after I moved here and every time you go back home, it feels different every single time. But I feel like lately I've been trying to kind of change my mind around what home is, because now I call Toronto home, but at the same time back home where my family is, it's still home. And it's weird having like different places that you think of differently, but you call them the same thing, home. So I'm kind of trying to think of home as more of a place where my family is, instead of like relating it to just a place. Because what is going on right now in the world, you never know when you're going to move, where you're going to move, where your family is going to move, what is going to happen. So I feel like it's easier kind of disconnecting yourself from a place and thinking about home as just the origin of like memories and stuff, like old versions of yourself. And I'm also trying to think of home as just little things. Do you have that little things that remind you of home that you're like, this is that?
I have a lot of little things. Like in terms of objects specifically, like my mom hands me little knickknacks and like artwork to take back to my home, I guess now, which is my apartment where I live. So like I have a lot of like African paintings and like little sculptures and statues that I slowly kind of bring back, and that reminds me of home. My mom passes down clothes to me, and that's like a little bit of a homey feeling. And then outside of objects, like smells are very reminiscent of home to me. Like I always explain this in a really weird way, and I think we've talked about this, is that when I think of like home and comfort, the smell that comes to mind is like leftover like cigarettes and like cold air, because cold air has that crisp smell, and those two things together smell exactly like Madrid does in the fall and winter. So like every time I like walk by that, or I step outside and I smell like a cool, brisk, clean air, it really is like, oh, home.
Yeah, I think we talked about it because I have something similar with how spring smells like. Spring in Toronto is not like it is back home. Back home, spring is like 3 months. You're experiencing like a nice weather, like 15 to 20 degrees. You're wearing like your trench coat and everything is nice. Like the flowers are coming back, the trees are green again. And there's this specific smell of like morning spring when you come outside, and it's kind of crisp, but at the same time you feel like it's getting warmer, and you're like, and when like here I can catch that smell for like a second. I can't explain it, but it brings like so much comfort to me, and I can just stand outside. I just left my apartment building and I'm like standing there smelling the air. I'm like, I can't explain it, but it smells like home, because spring is also my favorite season, and it's so beautiful back home. And if I could just, experience Ukrainian spring here, I think my life would be complete, because it's so beautiful. Here, spring, it's like, okay, it's winter, it's -20, then it's like a week, and then it's +30.
Yeah.
Before we started filming that, you and me talked about back home cuisine and how we miss that, and how sometimes, after a long day, you're like, you know what, I'm just a little homesick. I need something to comfort me. Do you have any foods that you cook for yourself, or maybe you buy them and they remind you of home as well?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like both of my cultural foods are so complex and demanding to make. But I always cook with extra virgin olive oil that I bludge all the way over from Spain in my suitcase. It's heavy and takes up space, but it's worth it. And like, even sometimes just like my favorite comforting breakfast is like toast with extra virgin olive oil and tomato and like a little bit of salt, and it's pan con tomate, and it's delicious. It's super simple, but that always is so filling. It just reminds me of what it tastes like to have breakfast in Madrid. And then my all-time comfort meal is pho, because my mom, as everybody thinks their mom, makes the best pho, and it takes like 12 hours usually to like make the broth and like find the bones and whatever you need to make the broth. So it's a really demanding dish to make. I do bring over instant pho from Vietnam that does the trick sometimes, but usually, like, if I've had a really rough day, that's the one thing that I will order in through delivery, and like I just can't explain it. Like a little bit of hot sauce and the hot soup and like the warm noodles, it really just like revives your soul a little bit.
I know, sometimes you just, when you eat that and you think about the old times when you were little and you used to come home from like school, it was a long day and your mom was like, do you want this? And you're like, yes, mom, I want that. I'm so glad I live in the area where I can get access to the Ukrainian restaurants so easily, because I love the beet soup, borscht. So it's like, it's a red soup with like cabbage, potatoes, some beans, meat, and beets itself. It's so good, but at the same time, I never made it myself, because I think it takes a lot of time. It's not like soup, you like just put everything in one place. You need to prepare like cabbage with the like tomato sauce, and you need 2 different pans for that. And I'm like, no, I'm not making that myself. Also, I wanted to touch on your trip this summer when you went back to Vietnam. How did it feel going back there when you are already an adult and you're experiencing the culture and you're kind of meeting that culture again, but all grown up?
Yeah, this was the first time that I went back home. I grew up going home every year, every summer with my parents, but this was the first time that I went back without them and like on my own. And I think it was an interesting experience. I mean, I had a great time. Like, I love Vietnam. I feel very Vietnamese, and like, I speak Vietnamese. I'm very connected to that culturally because my parents put a big emphasis on understanding like who I am and like all of the parts that make that up. But I don't know, it was a little bit of a strange experience. I think like I had always recognized that I wasn't like everybody else. And that was always made clear to me, like by my parents, by just how people in society interact with me. But it was even, I think, a little bit weirder seeing it as an adult, like looking at the way that my little cousins live life and how, you know, different things are expected of them that are expected of me because we are just different culturally, even though I am culturally Vietnamese. And it's just strange also, like sometimes how people treat you like a foreigner, even when you're not. Like I would have family members ask me all the time, like, oh, this is your first time trying this food, right? And I'm like, no, like I'm Vietnamese. Like I spent 8 years of my life living here. Like my mom's Vietnamese. She cooks Vietnamese food. Like this is also like mine. And it feels like, especially as an adult, and you know, your features change and you look more mature and your face changes. And I think like more apparent than ever now, at least to them, like I look very clearly different. And so it felt a little bit like being received as an outsider, which I always knew but didn't always feel when I was like living there and actively a part of that like lifestyle of going to my grandparents' house and having lunch or dinner with them. So I think it really helped me see Vietnam in a different way. I think I have a very good understanding of what my country is and everything it's gone through, but it helped me understand a little bit more about how people see me specifically and not how I see them.
Yeah. Like, did it have an effect on you personally? Did you take anything from that trip or like, oh, like I'm glad I'm this way and like not this way, or I'm glad that I kind of changed that mindset? Did you have any moments like this?
100%. I think I took away from it, one, like understanding better the value of community, which I think sometimes moving to North America and living here gets a bit lost because, you know, you live by yourself, like you work, like you just really do things for yourself. And that's not really what life is like for a lot of other communities. So that really resonated with me, is doing a better job of being mindful of building my own community and making time and space for that. And like life is not just about me. I think that's one of the biggest lessons of, I mean, a lot of cultures in general, but in Southeast Asian culture, you don't live for yourself, like you live for your community and
For the family.
to take care of those around you. And that really resonated. But I think I also learned that I'm very grateful that my mother has always been a bit of like a black sheep herself and like open-minded and raised me very differently with, you know, the expectation that like the world is my oyster and I can do whatever I want, and that, you know, there's not really any policing about like how I should dress or express myself or how many piercings I can have. And I feel very fortunate to have that because I know that a lot of my culture is much more conservative in a lot of ways. And seeing that contrast makes me grateful that I understand that there's ways of life outside of my own, which I think in one hand I've always understood, but made me very grateful for my individual upbringing as well.
When you were talking about your experience, I also thought how, I mean, I grew up in the origin of my culture and with my people and with very Ukrainian mentality, but I feel like every time I go back, after living on my own, I see how differently my parents and my grandparents look at me, the way I speak, because I also live alone. When I went home the last time, I forgot how to be a part of the family and how to do everything for the community as well, to do it for others, especially for your family. You always need to help them. You always need to be helpful. And I kind of forgot how to be helpful at home because I live for myself. I cook for myself. I clean for myself. I do everything when I want to. And when I went back, I'm like, I need to think about others as well. And it's kind of difficult to kind of wrap your head around that fact because it feels like I was just living here yesterday, but at the same time, it's been like 2 years and I'm like, no, it's so different. Like I can't go back to how I was there before. It's also difficult seeing how they change as well without me, and it feels like I am the side character in their life. I mean, I know I'm not the main character in their life, but still it feels like I'm, what was her name? Jeannie from Gossip Girl, when she went to like fashion school, and she would appear sometimes in the episodes and you're like, why are you here? You know, it almost feels the same with me because it also feels like I don't know what they're experiencing, but I also don't know where they're going in terms of their mentality, because I feel like I was never very Ukrainian as well. I was very fond of like American culture, American TV shows, and I was watching that, and I feel like I can't say I was never Ukrainian, but I wasn't like 100% Ukrainian. The 50% of my mentality was always open. That's why I feel it's not hard for me to find myself here, because I'm open to like other cultures and other mentalities, and it's not hard for me to like find the same language with them. But it feels like when I go back home and, for example, I talk to my sister, I'm like, we think differently, and I don't know how to kind of find a common ground. And I feel like it's so difficult to kind of explain to them the different mentality when they're so close to it, or the way that they do things here. Like it takes you so much longer to, I don't know, make an appointment or call somewhere. Like today I tried calling Shoppers to refill my prescription. I was waiting on the line for 10 minutes and I'm like, I'm not doing that. Back at home it would be so much easier.
Yep.
So we're moving closer to the end of the episode, and I want to end it on the note where we can give a little advice to our audience. So how do we deal with that feeling of being an outsider with your own people in your own culture?
That's a really good question. I think I'm still struggling to find that today, because as much as I feel Vietnamese and living abroad, I feel like I'm not a part of the Vietnamese community abroad because I'm just so different from them, and it's not something that a lot of them are open-minded to. So I'm figuring it out, but I think that I do my best to stay as connected as I can to who I am and my cultures. I eat at Vietnamese restaurants all the time, and like that gives me a chance to interact with people in Vietnamese, even though sometimes they speak to me in English. And I watch as many games of soccer as I can in like Spanish when I'm watching them and in different broadcasts. And I really just try to build a community that is accepting and supportive. And as much as it kind of sucks that I don't necessarily have the same community as who I am, I think it's really great that I've built a really good community, to use the word so many times, of people that also experience things similar to I do. So they might not be, you know, who I am, or Spanish or Vietnamese or whatever, but I think a lot of the people that I've surrounded myself with, like you, are very understanding and aware of the cultural differences that make up our life. And I think, if anything, it's been easier for me to connect with other foreign people, because I think we all have the mutual understanding that our life is so different from back home, but our life is also really different from people here and that are born and raised here. And there's just some things that are so difficult to explain or make sense to like the average Canadian, like about cultural values and boundaries, that they just would never understand. So I think it's really great and helpful to find little bits of like home that are comforting to you. And I think it's always really important to stay connected to your culture and who you are. Like I listen to the radio in Spanish sometimes, which is like maybe weird, but like it's just really comforting and nice to have that.
It's weird. It's great that you do that, because it makes me sad if there is a person who like, no, I reject everything from back at home. It sounds too radical to me. But I think I'm on the same page. I'm still figuring it out. And I think it's alright that we don't have it figured it out. I feel like looking for people who are experiencing the same thing that you are experiencing, even though it's not like specifically similar. Like, even though you and me would have different backgrounds, but I think we have so much that we both relate to, and we can talk about it, and it makes you feel less lonely, I would say, because it might be a lot when you try to talk to people here, Canadians who grew up here, and it's hard for you to explain to them that, yeah, like I have two like homes, or like I have multiple homes and I have multiple backgrounds, or like we had this traditions here. As much as I say I'm not 100% Ukrainian, there are some things that I kept within myself from our mentality, and I don't want to change it about myself, but sometimes it feels like I need to explain it to other people. Like, I do this because I'm used to doing this, and it's kind of weird that I need to explain that to you, because I know that you're used to like different things here. For example, we are not as talkative about our feelings. I would say we're more actionable when it comes to explaining what we feel or what we go through. But here, it's so much easier for them to talk about what they're going through, when for me it takes a minute, and I'm learning how to do that. Maybe it's gonna help me to feel better or something, but I feel like it takes time, and it's all right that we're figuring it out, and I think we're doing great.
I think so too. Life is hard.
Yeah.
And especially harder when you're alone and not from somewhere. But yeah, I agree. I think it's all about having other people that understand your experience, because it is so hard trying to explain why you are the way you are to people that might not understand. But that's what community is for.
Thank you for watching the first episode of Thriving, and for all of your support. I'm gonna see you in the next episode. Bye!